At every company James ever worked at, people liked him. Not tolerated. Not respected from a distance. Genuinely, warmly liked. He was the man who remembered birthdays. Who stayed late to help a colleague finish something that was not his responsibility. Who softened difficult news with the right words. Who never made a meeting uncomfortable, even when uncomfortable things needed to be said. He was liked by his managers. Liked by the people below him. Liked by the people beside him. Liked at leaving drinks and Christmas parties. And the kind of Thursday afternoon gatherings where people say things they almost mean. James was 37 years old. He had been working for 15 years. And he had just been passed over for promotion. For the third time in 4 years. By people who liked him. Who genuinely, warmly, completely liked him. And had still chosen someone else. Every single time. James sat in his car after the third one. And asked himself a question he had never allowed himself to ask before. What is being liked actually worth? James had learned early that being liked kept you safe. He had grown up the middle child. In a house with a specific temperature. Not cold, not warm. The kind of carefully maintained neutral. Where everyone was fine. And nothing was ever fully said. He had learned without being taught that the way to move through a room without damage was to be agreeable. To make people comfortable. To read what a person needed from you. And become it. Quickly, naturally, without them noticing you had done it. He had been doing this since he was 8 years old. By the time he reached the workplace, it was not a strategy. It was just how he moved through the world. He agreed in meetings when he disagreed. He said yes to requests he should have declined. He softened his opinions until they had no edges left. No edges meant no friction. And no friction meant everyone stayed comfortable. And everyone stayed comfortable meant everyone liked him. He had never once stopped to ask what it was costing him. Until the third time a person who liked him chose someone else. He went to his manager. Not to argue. Not to complain. Just to understand. He asked directly, "What does the person you promoted have that I don't?" His manager, a woman named Claire, who had known James for 6 years and genuinely liked him, paused for longer than was comfortable. Then she said something that James would turn over in his mind for the rest of the year. James, when you walk into a room, people relax. And that's a gift. But when you leave the room, nobody knows what you actually think. Nobody knows what you stand for. Nobody knows what you would do if something genuinely difficult landed in front of you. You're the person everyone wants at a dinner party. We needed someone for the harder thing. James drove home in silence. He wanted to be angry. He had the shape of an argument ready. The years of service. The extra hours. The meetings he had saved. The relationships he had maintained. But he couldn't make the argument. Because Claire had not said he was bad at his job. She had said nobody knew what he was. And the worst part, the part that sat in his chest like something cold and heavy, all the way home and into the evening, was that she was right. He didn't know what he was either. Not really. Not underneath the agreeableness. Not underneath the careful, practiced warmth. He had spent 15 years making sure everyone around him was comfortable. He had never once asked himself what he actually thought. What James did in the 3 months after that conversation cost him things he had spent 15 years building, and gave him back something he hadn't known he was missing. Stay with me. It started small. In a meeting 2 weeks later, a proposal was put forward. that James thought was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Significantly wrong. He had seen a version of this fail before. He knew why it would fail again. The old James would have found a gentle way to half-suggest a concern, while making sure the person proposing it still felt good about having proposed it. He didn't do that. He said clearly and directly. Not unkindly, not aggressively. Just with the complete calm of someone who had decided their observation was worth the room's time. I think this will fail for the same reason the last version failed. Here's what I think we're missing. The room went slightly quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. Just, attending quiet. The specific silence of people who have just heard something said without apology, and are deciding what to do with it. The proposal was reconsidered. His concern was addressed. The meeting moved on. Afterward, a colleague he barely knew stopped him in the corridor and said, "That was the right call. I'm glad someone said it." James walked to his desk and sat down, and noticed something unfamiliar in his chest. Not the warm, familiar glow of being liked. Something quieter and more solid than that. It happened again the following week. A request came in that would have taken 3 days, and produced nothing of value. James said no. Clearly. With a brief explanation. Without apology. The person asking was momentarily surprised. They went away. The conversation was over. James waited for the discomfort that always followed saying no to someone. It didn't come. Not everyone adjusted easily. There were colleagues who had relied on James's agreeableness the way some people rely on a door that was always open. They didn't think about it until it wasn't. One colleague became cooler toward him. Not hostile. Just recalibrated. The easy warmth that had existed between them now had a small, permanent change in temperature. James noticed. He sat with it. He had expected this. What he hadn't expected was how manageable it would be. He had spent 15 years afraid that the cost of not being liked would be something he couldn't survive. The reality was a slightly cooler corridor. A colleague who smiled less readily. A few conversations that didn't happen. That would have happened before. He could survive this. He had been surviving much more than this. For much longer. He had just been calling it something else. 8 months after his conversation with Claire, James was called into her office again. He sat down. She slid a document across the desk. She said, "The team needs a director. The person who takes this role will make decisions that not everyone agrees with. They will have to hold a position when people push back. They will have to be the kind of person the room listens to, not just likes. I think that's you now." I'm not sure it was 8 months ago. James looked at the document. He thought about the meeting where he had said the proposal was wrong. The request he had declined. The corridor with the slightly cooler temperature. The colleague whose smile had changed. He thought about Claire's words from 8 months earlier. Nobody knows what you stand for. They knew now. He accepted the role. Not because he had stopped being the person who remembered birthdays and helped colleagues finish things. He was still that person. He had just stopped making it the only thing. James thinks about the 15 years sometimes. Not with anger. With something closer to understanding. The agreeableness that had defined him had come from somewhere real. A child learning how to move through rooms safely. A person who genuinely cared about the people around him. None of it had been false. It had just been incomplete. Being liked is not a small thing. The world needs people who make rooms warmer. Who remember that the person across from them is a person and not just a function. But there is a version of being liked That is really just the careful, exhausting work of never letting anyone see what you actually think. And that version, the version James had been living, does not build anything. It just maintains a temperature. The question worth asking, the one James finally asked himself at 37 in a car park, after the third time someone who liked him chose someone else, is not am I liked? It is am I known? Because known is what you build something on. Liked is just what you feel in the moment before you leave the room. James is known now by fewer people than before, and more completely. That is not a consolation prize. That is the whole point. If James's story stayed with you, subscribe to Tales for Thought. Every week one honest story about a real human decision and what it quietly built or cost. Before your next meeting, your next conversation, your next moment where you are about to agree with something you don't agree with, ask yourself, do the people in this room know what I actually think? If the answer is no, today is a good day to change that.